In the heart of forgotten towns, where the streets are quiet and the past lingers in the shadows, strange phenomena occur that defy all logic. These are not the bustling mysteries of city life or the fantastical tales of grand metropolises. No, these are the bizarre, unsettling glitches that crop up in small, sleepy towns where time seems to stand still until the walls come alive. These are stories of unexplained glitches that have haunted the minds of those who dare to recall them. 10 such eerie tales unfold, each more perplexing than the last. Story 1. The Silent Whisper of Hazel Grove, a haunted glitch in time. In the quaint and forgotten town of Hazel Grove, nestled on the outskirts, stood an old manor. The house had long been abandoned, its once grand walls now crumbling and covered in ivy. The manor, known as Waverly House, had a history that spanned generations, but no one had dared to live there for years. Local legend whispered of strange happenings within its decaying walls, tales of eerie whispers on stormy nights, flickering lights, and shadows that moved on their own. Yet, despite the stories, the house remained a distant memory for most of the townsfolk. Only the brave, or perhaps the foolish, would venture near it after dusk. The rumors of the haunted manor had intrigued a young couple, Emily and James, who had just moved to Hazel Grove. Recently married and eager to explore their new surroundings, they saw the manor as the perfect opportunity for an adventurous evening. The town's folk tales only fueled their curiosity. After all, what better way to experience the supernatural than by spending a night in the very house that everyone avoided? One cold autumn evening, they made their way to Waverly House, their flashlights cutting through the thick fog that clung to the ground. The manor loomed ahead, its silhouette shrouded in darkness, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring out at them. As they stepped inside, the heavy wooden door creaked open with a loud groan, as though it had been waiting for them. The interior was a mix of grandeur and decay. Velvet curtains, now faded and torn, hung limply by the windows. The floorboards groaned underfoot, the air thick with the scent of mildew and dust. Yet, despite the housey abandonment, it felt alive in its own strange way, like it was holding on to memories it couldn't quite let go of. At first, everything seemed normal. The couple wandered from room to room, admiring the faded furniture and portraits that lined the walls. But as they ventured deeper into the heart of the house, the atmosphere began to shift. A cold draft crept through the hallways, causing Emily to shiver. James, ever the skeptic, dismissed it as a simple breeze, but Emily felt a strange unease settle in her chest. It wasn't long before the first strange thing happened. They were in the drawing room, a large space filled with antique furniture, when the temperature suddenly dropped. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, her breath now visible in the air. "Do you feel that?" she whispered to James, who was examining an old grandfather clock in the corner. Before he could respond, a soft whisper echoed through the room. At first, it was faint, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. But the sound quickly grew louder, growing clearer with every passing moment. "Don't trust the clock. Don't trust the clock. Don't trust the clock." The whispers repeated, as if the very walls themselves were speaking. James scoffed. "It's just the wind. This house has probably settled for years." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers were not just the wind. They seemed deliberate, purposeful. They seemed to know something. Curiosity overcame their hesitation. The couple approached the clock, a massive, ornate timepiece that stood tall in the corner of the room. The brass hands ticked away in a steady rhythm, but something about the way it stood there made the air around it feel charged, as though it were waiting for something. The whispers grew louder, their eerie cadence intertwining with the ticking of the clock. Emily reached out to touch the clock's surface. The moment her fingers brushed against it, a jolt of cold shot through her. The clock's hands, once steadily ticking forward, began to move backward, slowly at first, then faster and faster, until they were spinning wildly in reverse. The air around them thickened, as if time itself was bending, distorting. "James, this isn't normal," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Suddenly, a deep, bone-chilling silence filled the room. The clock stopped spinning, but the atmosphere was charged with an unnatural stillness. It was as if the entire house had frozen in place. The shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching out like fingers across the walls. The whispers ceased, leaving only the sound of Emily's frantic breathing and the erratic beat of her heart. James stepped forward, his hands shaking as he reached for the clock. But before he could touch it, the room seemed to flicker, as though it were glitching, like a faulty video feed. For a split second, the entire room seemed to distort, as if time itself had been caught in an error. The walls stretched and shrank, the floor beneath them trembled, and for a brief moment, they saw what appeared to be flashes of other moments in time, glimpses of the house in its prime, of people long dead, of shadows lurking in corners that no one had noticed before. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything returned to normal. The clock resumed its forward ticking. The temperature slowly climbed back to an uncomfortable warmth, and the whispers faded into the background, as though they had never existed. The couple stood there, frozen, trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. James broke the silence first. "We need to leave. Now." Without another word, they rushed out of the room, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The door slammed shut behind them, and as they stumbled outside into the cold night air, they felt the oppressive weight of the manor's silence lift, as if it had released them. The whispers had stopped. The glitch in time had closed, but the strange feeling lingered. The house, they knew, was not just haunted by the past. It was haunted by something far older, something that bent time itself. The town of Hazel Grove would never forget that night, and neither would Emily and James. They had witnessed something far more terrifying than any ghost. They had witnessed time glitching, unraveling in the most unexpected of places. The next morning, the manor stood silent once more, its crumbling facade hiding the secrets within. And as the couple left Hazel Grove, they couldn't help but wonder, had they truly escaped? Or had the glitch in time followed them, waiting for the right moment to return? Story 2. The Vanishing Mirror of Trenton. A glitch beyond time. Trenton was a quiet, unassuming town, tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the world, a place where time seemed to move at its own pace. The streets were lined with modest brick houses, their windows reflecting the soft golden light of the sun. The town had a charm to it, one that never felt rushed, as if the clock had decided to stop ticking somewhere long ago. Everything in Trenton was predictably ordinary, the same shops, the same faces day after day. But beneath this surface of tranquility lay a peculiar mystery, an antique shop that was unlike any other. The shop, called Timeless Treasures, stood at the far end of the main street. From the outside, it looked like any other dusty relic store, shelves crowded with trinkets, old books, and forgotten artifacts. But among all the odds and ends, there was one object that drew more attention than anything else. An ancient mirror that had been in the shop for as long as anyone could remember. The mirror, framed in ornate gold, was no ordinary mirror. Its surface, though perfectly smooth, never seemed to reflect the present. Instead, it showed something far more haunting: people from the past. Locals had spoken of the mirror in hushed tones for years, exchanging stories of strange reflections. Some claimed to have seen loved ones long gone, while others spoke of seeing faces they couldn't recognize, dressed in clothes from bygone eras. But no one could ever explain the phenomenon. It was as if the mirror was a portal to a time before, showing images of people from decades or even centuries ago. Over time, the mirror became a fixture of the town's folklore, a strange artifact that no one could seem to make sense of. And yet, despite the stories, no one ever dared to look too closely. Evelyn Saunders, a local historian who had recently moved back to Trenton, had always been fascinated by the town's history. She'd spent countless hours poring over old records, speaking to the elderly residents, and uncovering long-forgotten stories. So when she heard about the mysterious mirror, her curiosity was piqued. She knew there was a connection between the mirror and the town's past, and she was determined to uncover its secrets. One afternoon, Evelyn found herself standing inside Timeless Treasures, her eyes fixed on the mirror. The shop was empty except for the soft ticking of an old clock on the wall. The mirror, as always, seemed to shimmer in the dim light, casting a reflection of the room that felt wrong. There was an odd stillness to it, a sense that the mirror was holding something back. Evelyn stood before it for several moments, her breath steady, her mind racing with the possibilities of what she might find. As she gazed into the mirror, she saw the reflection of a woman standing where she should be. At first, she thought it was just her own reflection, but something was amiss. The woman in the mirror wasn't her. The reflection was older, dressed in a faded, vintage dress from the 1920s. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the face. It was the image of a woman she had seen in old photographs, a woman who had died decades ago. The woman, whom Evelyn had read about in her research, was none other than Margaret Blackwell, the daughter of one of Trenton's founding families. Margaret had disappeared mysteriously in the late 1920s, and despite exhaustive searches, no trace of her had ever been found. Evelyn leaned in closer, captivated by the image before her. The woman in the mirror, though a reflection, seemed alive. Her eyes locked onto Evelyn's with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Margaret's lips parted, and she smiled, a soft, almost sad smile. But it was the next moment that caused Evelyn to freeze in place. Margaret in the mirror raised her hand, beckoning her forward, as if inviting her into the world of the past. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Her body tensed with both fear and fascination. She knew she should step away, but something about the invitation in Margaret's eyes was too compelling to resist. It was as if the mirror itself was pulling her in, urging her to come closer, to step into that other world where the past and present collided. But before Evelyn could react, the world around her seemed to warp. The reflection of Margaret's face twisted slightly, and for a moment, her smile turned into something darker, more sinister. The woman in the mirror grinned in a way that felt wrong, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Panic surged through Evelyn's chest, and she stumbled back, her heart racing. As she turned to flee, she caught one last glimpse of the mirror. Margaret's reflection no longer smiled. Instead, her eyes widened, filled with a cold, knowing gaze. The reflection flickered for a brief second, like a glitch in the system, before the image of Margaret vanished entirely. The mirror was empty once more, reflecting only the dusty shelves of the shop and Evelyn's shocked face. Terrified, Evelyn rushed out of the shop, her legs weak beneath her. She had felt the pull of something beyond the glass, something that was not just a reflection but a piece of history trapped in time. The encounter with Margaret had left her shaken to her core. But what troubled her most was the fleeting moment when the mirror had glitched. Was the mirror a portal to the past, or was it something far more dangerous? The next day, Evelyn returned to Timeless Treasures to confront the shopkeeper, Mr. Pierce, a thin, wiry man who had owned the store for as long as anyone could remember. He was sitting behind the counter, his fingers tracing the edges of an old book, but his eyes flicked up when Evelyn entered. "Did you see it?" he asked, his voice low, as if he already knew what had happened. Evelyn nodded, still shaken. The woman, Margaret Blackwell. She looked at me. She smiled, and then she vanished. Mr. Pierce sighed deeply, setting the book aside. The mirror has been like that for years. It glitches, shows people from the past, people who no longer exist. We don't know why, but it's been a part of this town for as long as I can remember. Why didn't you tell anyone? Evelyn demanded. Some things are better left unexplained, he replied, his voice heavy with regret. The mirror is a glitch in time, I suppose. A tear between the present and the past. And some people, well, they've gotten too close. They've been pulled into it, lost, as if they were never meant to be found again. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't just seen Margaret Blackwell's reflection. She had felt it, too. Something about that moment had lingered in her, like a door to another world had opened, and she had barely escaped before it slammed shut. The mirror continued to stand in the corner of Timeless Treasures, its surface smooth and unremarkable to anyone who didn't know its secret. But Evelyn couldn't forget the eerie reflection of Margaret, the beckoning smile, and the glitch in time that still haunted her dreams. Trenton's mystery had deepened, and she knew she would never look at the mirror or the past the same way again. For some glitches in time are not just fleeting moments. They are warnings. Warnings that history is never truly gone. Sometimes it's just waiting to be seen again. Story 3. The Time-Warped Streetlights of Maplewood. A glitch in the fabric of time. Maplewood was one of those towns that felt like it belonged in another era. With its tree-lined streets, quaint houses, and charming little shops, it had a peaceful, almost nostalgic vibe. The streets were always illuminated by the soft, warm glow of the streetlights that lined the roads, casting long shadows in the evenings. The quiet hum of the town was comforting, and for many of the residents, it felt like nothing ever really changed. Life moved at its own steady pace, and time seemed to stand still. But as Greg, a longtime resident, often found himself thinking it was that very stillness that sometimes felt unsettling. One crisp autumn evening, after stopping by the local grocery store, Greg walked the familiar path home. The evening air was sharp with the scent of wood smoke and the crispness of fallen leaves. He slipped his hands into the pockets of his jacket, his breath visible in the cool air, and began his walk down Maplewood's main street. The streetlights flickered as he walked past, casting their soft, golden light across the pavement. But tonight, something was off. The usual rhythm of the lights, one flickering and dimming here and there, was interrupted. Greg noticed it almost immediately. The lights were blinking in perfect synchrony, as though someone had suddenly taken control of them, forcing them to pulse in unison. It was more than just a malfunction. The light show was strange, hypnotic, almost like a strobe effect, making it hard for Greg to focus his attention on anything for too long. The sharp flashes of light seemed to distort his perception of the world around him, creating a disorienting, surreal atmosphere. He shook his head, trying to clear the fuzziness that settled in his mind. "Must be the tiredness," he muttered to himself. But as he continued walking, the world around him felt increasingly unreal. The streetlights, once steady and dependable, now felt like they were part of something much bigger, something out of his control. As Greg walked under one of the lights, something strange happened. The air seemed to change. It felt thicker, colder. Suddenly, the world around him froze. The movement of life around him halted. People who had been walking in the distance were now suspended in mid-stride, their feet still moving, but their bodies completely motionless, as if time had suddenly snapped into place, and their movements were trapped in an eternal loop. Greg's heart began to race. His hands gripped the sides of his jacket as he tried to make sense of the bizarre scene unfolding before him. The street was silent, the air too still, as if it had been sucked of sound itself. He turned to speak, to call out for help, but no words came out. His mouth moved, but the sound didn't reach his ears. He was in a vacuum, suspended in some kind of distorted reality where time and space no longer obeyed their usual rules. He looked around in a panic, but everything remained frozen. The cars that had been parked along the curb were now motionless, their engines silent and their headlights frozen mid-glow. The leaves, once fluttering in the evening breeze, hung suspended in mid-air, caught in time. Greg's mind raced. What is happening? He tried moving his arms, but they felt heavy, as though the very air had become thick with resistance. The strobe-like flashes of the streetlights continued to pulse in a rhythmic, unnatural pattern, each flash a stark, disorienting beat that seemed to carry a hidden message, one that Greg couldn't quite grasp. The moment stretched on. Greg stood frozen, trying to comprehend what was happening, feeling a strange sense of helplessness wash over him. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to move, to escape this bizarre loop, but the glitch in reality had trapped him in a suspended moment. His mind spun, and his heart thudded in his chest. Just as Greg thought he would lose his sanity in the surreal silence, the flickering lights stopped. A heavy silence filled the street. The world around him slowly returned to motion, but it was different. It felt wrong, as if the world was offbeat. People began to move again, but their movements were awkward, as though they were adjusting to something they couldn't quite place. The sound of the night, once so familiar, returned in a distorted echo. The hum of distant cars, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the murmur of voices seemed muffled, like he was hearing them underwater. Greg blinked, trying to steady himself, but something still felt out of place. Was it just his imagination? Had the streetlights somehow caused his perception to glitch, or had something much deeper in the fabric of time and reality cracked open for that brief moment? He quickened his pace, eager to reach his house and escape the unsettling feeling gnawing at him. The streetlights above him flickered once more, but this time it was different. There was no synchronized pulse, no strange strobe effect. The lights flickered erratically, like they were struggling to find their rhythm again. Greg watched them closely, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. As he reached the safety of his front door and stepped inside, he locked the door behind him and collapsed onto the couch. His breath was ragged, and his hands shook as he tried to make sense of the bizarre glitch in reality he had just experienced. He couldn't explain it, how time had bent, how the streetlights had somehow distorted the flow of everything around him. It felt as if something had fractured, something he couldn't see but could feel, a crack in the delicate fabric of time itself. Greg stayed awake that night, lying in the darkness, trying to shake the feeling that the glitch wasn't just an isolated incident. That somehow, the streets of Maplewood, that once calm and peaceful town, were being affected by something much larger than they could understand. The next morning, things seemed normal again. The town was quiet, and the streetlights returned to their familiar glow. But Greg couldn't shake the feeling that the glitch hadn't been a random malfunction. There was something off in the world now, a subtle disturbance he couldn't put his finger on. And from that day on, every time Greg walked past the streetlights on his way home, he felt as though the air around him was thicker, heavier, and waiting for the next glitch to happen, as if time itself was ready to freeze again. Story 4. The Haunting of Clover Hill Cemetery. Trapped in a temporal glitch. Clover Hill Cemetery had long been regarded as a peaceful resting place, tucked away at the edge of town. The cemetery was bordered by a line of ancient oaks, their twisted limbs creating an almost impenetrable canopy of shadows over the graves below. There was a sense of solemnity here, a quiet reverence that made it a place of reflection for those who walked its winding paths. It had been a century since the first residents had been laid to rest in Clover Hill, and the cemetery had always retained its air of stillness and serenity, until one autumn evening, when it was disrupted by a strange and inexplicable occurrence. Frank Mitchell, the cemetery's longtime caretaker, had worked there for nearly 20 years. A man of simple habits and a quiet disposition, Frank had never been one to believe in the supernatural. To him, the cemetery was merely a place to keep clean, where the dead could rest undisturbed. He spent his days trimming the overgrown grass, tending to the headstones, and making sure the cemetery remained orderly. But that night, as he walked between the rows of gravestones, something felt off. It was late. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind only the faintest traces of light. The air was cool and crisp, the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves filling his nostrils. Frank had just finished sweeping a path near the older section of the cemetery when he noticed something odd. One of the tombstones in the distance seemed to flicker like an image on a malfunctioning screen. At first, Frank thought it was just a trick of the fading light, something caused by the moonlight filtering through the trees. But as he squinted, The tombstone disappeared before his eyes, only to reappear a second later in the exact same spot. His heart skipped a beat. Frank rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the growing unease creeping up his spine. He stepped closer, moving cautiously toward the gravestone that had caught his attention. As he got nearer, he saw it more clearly. The name engraved on the stone, Eleanor Finch, 1876 to 1911, flickered in and out of existence, as though the very essence of the grave was being torn between two realities. He backed away slowly, convinced that he was seeing things, his mind playing tricks on him in the dim light. But then something even more unsettling happened. The graves around him, the hundreds of gravestones that had stood undisturbed for generations, began to glitch in the same way. Tombstones flickered like pixels on a broken screen, disappearing and reappearing, as though they were being pulled in and out of existence. Frank felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as the eerie phenomenon spread. He looked around, his eyes widening with growing fear as the glitch seemed to sweep over the entire cemetery. The faces carved into the stone, once serene and timeless, now twisted and warped in the flashing light. The wind seemed to pick up, whistling through the trees. But it was not the usual sound, it was hollow, as though it carried voices from somewhere far beyond the grave. Frank could almost hear whispers on the wind, words he couldn't quite make out, but that sent shivers down his spine. The glitch wasn't just visual. As Frank stepped forward, he could feel it in the air. The ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as though time itself was trembling, uncertain of where it stood. The once still cemetery had become a strange, surreal world, where reality was being torn apart by invisible forces. He could hear the faint rustle of leaves in the distance, but the sound seemed muffled, distorted by the glitch. The world around him felt fractured, broken, as though the very fabric of time had been warped. Panicked, Frank turned to leave. The exit of the cemetery, a tall, wrought iron gate that had stood in place for decades, beckoned him. But as he hurried toward it, he noticed that the gate itself seemed to flicker. The iron bars warped and shimmered, stretching and shrinking in unnatural ways. One moment, the gate was there, and the next, it vanished completely, only to reappear in a different position. Frank reached out to grasp the gate's cold iron, but it felt strangely intangible, like he was trying to hold onto something that didn't belong to this world. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He was trapped. The entire cemetery seemed to be folding in on itself, the glitch growing more intense with every passing second. Frank could feel his heart racing, the fear building in his chest as the world around him twisted and spiraled into an incomprehensible mess of distorted images. The spirits of the departed, whose names were etched in the tombstones, seemed to be caught in the glitch, unable to escape the loop. Frank could almost see their faces flickering in and out of existence, some angry, some sorrowful, all of them trapped in a moment that didn't belong to them. His breathing quickened. He was no longer just in the cemetery. He had crossed into something far more terrifying, a temporal anomaly, a glitch in the fabric of time itself. The dead were not at rest. They were caught in a cycle, unable to escape, as if the cemetery itself had become a place outside of time. Frank felt his mind unravel as he realized the truth. This wasn't just an issue with the tombstones or the gate. The entire cemetery had become trapped in some kind of time loop, an eternal glitch that kept the spirits suspended, unable to move on. As the minutes dragged on, Frank's panic reached a fever pitch. He tried to run, but the cemetery seemed to stretch endlessly before him, the paths twisting into impossible angles. Every time he tried to move toward the exit, he found himself back at the same spot, surrounded by flickering tombstones and ghostly, distorted faces. Time had no meaning here. The cemetery was a prison, a place where the past and present were entangled in an eternal glitch. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the glitch stopped. The cemetery returned to its familiar stillness. The tombstones were once again solid, the gate standing firmly in place. The air felt normal again, the eerie whispers and disorienting flickers fading away. The night sky stretched out above him, peaceful once more. The temporal anomaly, it seemed, had reset, leaving Frank standing in the center of Clover Hill Cemetery, dazed and confused. The next morning, when the sun rose over the cemetery, it was as though nothing had happened. The cemetery appeared untouched, undisturbed, the gravestones standing tall and proud in the early light. But Frank knew better. He had witnessed something that defied explanation, something that had left a permanent mark on him. He had been trapped in the glitch of time, a glitch that, for some unknown reason, had allowed the spirits of the dead to be caught in an eternal loop. Frank left Clover Hill Cemetery that day, but he was forever changed. He couldn't shake the feeling that the glitch might return, that the cemetery was not just a resting place, but a place where the past and the present could collide in ways no one could comprehend. He avoided the cemetery from then on, but the memory of that night lingered in his mind, a constant reminder that time was far more fragile than anyone realized. Story 5. The Forever Running Train of Valley Junction. A glitch that never ends. Valley Junction was a small, sleepy town where time seemed to pass slowly, almost lazily. With a population that barely surpassed a few hundred, the town existed in a kind of quiet isolation that made it feel like a relic of a bygone era. It had one main road, a few scattered houses, and, most notably, an old train station. The station, once a bustling hub for travelers, had long since fallen into disrepair. The trains that had once passed through Valley Junction now stopped coming years ago, leaving the tracks to rust and the station to fade into obscurity. The only reminder of its past glory was the single, faded timetable on the station wall, listing the now obsolete 11:59 p.m. train service that no one remembered using. The station itself had seen better days. The platform was cracked, the waiting room dusty and abandoned, with broken windows that let the wind whistle through the air. The station master, an elderly man named Mr. Quinn, had been the last to work there, but even he had left long ago, leaving the station to the elements. The townspeople often talked about the station, mostly in passing, with no real expectation of anything happening there. One crisp autumn night, when the clock struck midnight, something happened that no one could have predicted. Sarah Blake, a local resident who had lived in Valley Junction her entire life, was taking a late-night walk. She had always found the old station fascinating, the way it seemed frozen in time, standing quietly at the edge of town. She passed by it every evening, but tonight there was something different in the air. There was a peculiar hum, a vibration, a whisper of sound that seemed to drift from the tracks. Sarah paused for a moment, looking around to see if anyone else was nearby, but the streets were deserted. The only movement came from the trees swaying gently in the wind. It was then that she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a train whistle. It was faint at first, like a memory being tugged from the past, but it grew louder, more distinct. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew that no trains passed through Valley Junction anymore. The old tracks hadn't been used in years, but the whistle was real and it was getting closer. Drawn by the strange noise, Sarah made her way toward the station. The station lights flickered dimly, casting eerie shadows on the platform as she approached. The air around her seemed to pulse with energy, a charged anticipation hanging in the night. The whistle sounded again, this time much louder, and Sarah was sure she could feel the ground beneath her feet tremble as the sound grew. And then, emerging from the darkness, she saw it, a train. An old steam locomotive, its once shiny black exterior now dulled with age, slowly pulling into the station. The train's windows flickered with a strange, almost unnatural light, and its wheels hissed and groaned as it stopped at the platform. The sound of the train's arrival was deafening, a cacophony that seemed to echo from a different time altogether. Sarah stood frozen, unable to move, unsure of what she was seeing. The train didn't belong in the present. It was out of place, like something that had slipped through a crack in time. The sound of the train's whistle faded, but the train itself remained, its massive form looming in front of her. The station seemed to have come alive again, and Sarah felt a mix of awe and unease, as if the town's past had suddenly resurfaced, refusing to be forgotten. Curiosity overpowered her fear. Sarah approached the train and hesitantly boarded, the door to one of the cars creaking open as though it had been waiting for her. Inside, the train was dimly lit, and a chill ran through her as she took in the scene. The car was filled with people, but not in the way she expected. They sat in their seats, their faces expressionless, their bodies motionless, as though they had been frozen in time. None of them looked at her. They didn't move, didn't speak. It was as if the train was their prison, their eternal journey, and they were trapped in it, unable to break free. Sarah took a seat by the window, her mind racing with questions. What was this train? Where was it going? Why had it appeared now after so many years? She watched as the station outside faded into the distance, and the world outside the window began to shift. The familiar sights of Valley Junction started to blur, replaced by unfamiliar landscapes that seemed to flicker like a poorly loaded video. Fields of wheat, forests, and distant towns flickered in and out of focus, as though they were part of some fragmented, glitchy memory. The train moved at an impossible speed, its wheels spinning faster than any train should be capable of. The scenery outside the window morphed and changed, creating a disorienting, dizzying effect. It felt as though time itself had become untethered. Sarah tried to speak, but her voice was swallowed by the thick, eerie silence that permeated the train. She tried to ask the other passengers where they were going, but they remained still, their blank eyes fixed on nothing in particular. It was as if they were in a trance, unable to break free from the loop that had ensnared them. As the train continued its journey through these glitchy, flickering landscapes, Sarah realized the terrifying truth. This was no ordinary train. It was trapped in a time loop, a glitch in reality itself. She was on a train that would never stop, a train that moved through time but never truly reached a destination. Every time she looked out the window, the scenes outside shifted, but they were always the same, familiar, yet foreign, and always fleeting. The minutes, or perhaps hours, passed in an endless blur. Sarah's mind began to unravel as she realized she might never escape. The train was on a never-ending loop, stuck in time. It wasn't just a journey through the physical world. It was a journey through time itself, a glitch in the fabric of reality. The passengers were as trapped as she was, their faces expressionless and lifeless, bound to this eternal ride. But then, at what felt like the next stop, something shifted. The train suddenly screeched to a halt, the jarring sound snapping Sarah out of her daze. The flickering outside the window intensified, and for a moment, she thought the world itself might collapse. With a surge of panic, she realized that she had to escape before the train began its endless journey once more. As the doors opened, Sarah didn't hesitate. She leaped from the train, her feet landing on the familiar ground of Valley Junction. The train, with its eerie, ghostly whistle, began to pull away, fading into the darkness, its form flickering as though it were losing its grip on reality. The town, still silent, remained undisturbed. The streets were empty, and the station appeared unchanged, as if the night's events had never happened. Sarah stood there, panting, her heart racing, unable to understand what had just occurred. The train had vanished, but she could still hear the distant echo of its whistle, carried on the wind. The eerie sound lingered in the night air, a constant reminder of the glitch that had torn through time and space. Valley Junction never saw that train again. No one ever spoke of it. But every night, at midnight, Sarah could hear the faint whistle in the distance, as if the train was still out there, moving through the cracks of time, forever running, never stopping, and never reaching its destination.